After 40 years on this bench, I thought I had seen every possible way the world could break a person. But last Tuesday morning, the heavy oak doors of this courtroom swung open, and a woman walked in who didn't look like a criminal at all. Her name was Maria. She was clutching a worn-out coat around her shoulders, her eyes reflecting a kind of exhaustion that sleep simply cannot fix. She wasn't here for a high-speed chase or a complex corporate scam. She was being sued by a multi-million-dollar supermarket chain because she had walked out with a single loaf of bread and a small carton of milk without paying. The prosecutor called it retail theft. The law books call it a violation of property rights. But as I looked at her trembling hands and the way she tried to hide her face from the gallery, I realized I wasn't looking at a thief. I was looking at a mother who had reached the absolute end of her rope. What happened next? The decision I made and the truth that finally came to light is something that sent a shockwave through this entire building. It's a story that challenges everything we think we know about the thin line between justice and mercy. Before I tell you the rest of this story, do me a favor. If you saw someone drowning, would you arrest them for splashing water? Or would you reach out and pull them to safety? This is a story for anyone who believes that a person's worth is more than the balance in their bank account. Hit that subscribe button and leave a comment below. Tell me, have you ever felt like the world was closing in on you, and you just needed one person to see the human being behind the struggle? I read every single one of your stories, and today Maria's story truly needs to be heard. Maria stood at the podium, her voice barely a whisper. She told me she had lived in Providence her whole life. Her father was a fisherman. He taught her that if you work hard, the sea will provide. But the sea of life has been incredibly rough lately. She lost her job at a daycare when it closed down 6 months ago, and then the eviction notice arrived. Her 7-year-old son, Leo, he hadn't had a real meal in 2 days. When she walked into that store, she didn't see a crime. She saw her son's hungry eyes. I looked at the case file. City versus Maria Silva. The store was demanding the maximum fine and a permanent criminal record. They wanted to ensure she would never get a job again. They wanted a deterrent. But looking at her, I saw the signs of a silent alarm going off in our society. Those deep lines on her forehead, the way her shoulders were hunched, that's the physical map of a mother's desperation. And I knew right then and there that I couldn't just follow a cold procedure. I had to follow the truth. The atmosphere in the courtroom grew cold as the young prosecutor stood up. He adjusted his glasses and looked down at his legal pad, refusing to meet Maria's tearful gaze. He began to recite the facts of the case in a voice that sounded like a machine, devoid of emotion, focused only on the violation of property. He argued that the supermarket chain had a right to protect its inventory and that Maria's actions, regardless of her circumstances, were a direct threat to the rule of law. He demanded the maximum penalty, a $500 fine and 30 days in the county jail. I felt my jaw tighten as I listened to him speak. I looked at Maria, who had bowed her head so low it seemed she wanted to disappear into the floor. A fine of $500. To a woman who couldn't afford a $2 loaf of bread, that might as well have been $1 million. It was a financial black hole, a crushing weight that would swallow her and her son whole. I looked back at the prosecutor and asked, "Counsel, do you truly believe that sending a starving mother to jail is a victory for the people of Providence?" He shifted uncomfortably, citing policy and deterrence once again. He said that if we allowed one person to steal because they were hungry, the entire system would collapse. This is the invisible assassin of common sense that hides behind rules and regulations. I took off my glasses and leaned forward, my voice dropping to a low, firm tone. I told him that the law is not a blunt instrument used to crush the desperate. It is supposed to be a door to the truth. Maria's shoulders began to shake with silent sobs. She whispered that if she went to jail, there would be no one to pick up Leo from school. He would be taken by the state, and she would lose the only thing she had left in this world. I could see the audience in the gallery leaning in, their faces filled with the same compassion I was feeling. This wasn't just a trial anymore. It was a battle for the very soul of our community. I turned my attention to the representative from the supermarket chain who was sitting in the front row. I asked him if his company, which reported record profits last year, truly needed to see this woman behind bars for a loaf of bread. He looked at his polished shoes and said nothing. I realized then that the system had become so obsessed with procedures that it had completely forgotten the human being. I knew I had to do something that wasn't in the handbook. I sat back for a moment, observing the heavy silence that had filled the room. I've seen this pattern before. When institutions lose trust, cold fiction steps in to replace empathy. I looked closely at Maria and noticed a silver locket around her neck, tarnished but held tight. I asked her about it, and she told me it was the only thing she had left from her mother. She had tried to pawn it, but it was worth so little that the shop wouldn't even take it. This was a direct blow from life, a crushing weight that had stripped her of everything but her memories. I then decided to create a curiosity loop in the hearts of the audience. I looked at the gallery and asked if anyone in this room actually knew Maria. An elderly man in the back wearing a worn-out mechanic's jacket stood up. His name was Mr. Henderson. He told the court that he had watched Maria work 2 jobs for 3 years, never complaining, always helping the neighborhood kids with their homework on the sidewalk. He said, "Your Honor, she isn't a thief. She's a savior for those kids. And right now she's just a person who has lost her way in a world that stopped caring." Hearing his words, Maria's emotional triggers finally broke. She admitted that she had walked past the bread 3 times before picking it up. She was fighting an internal battle between her pride as a hard-working woman and the desperation of a starving mother. She didn't want a life raft for herself. She wanted a mechanism of survival for her son. I could see the prosecutor looking down, his overconfidence beginning to crack as he realized he wasn't prosecuting a criminal, but a victim of a system that had failed her completely. I turned to my clerk, Christina, and asked her to look up if this multi-million-dollar supermarket had any food waste programs. It turned out they discarded more fresh bread every single night than what Maria had taken to feed her child. This was the brutal truth that nobody wanted to hear. We live in a world where we protect the waste of the powerful and punish the hunger of the poor. I told the courtroom that Maria's struggle was a silent alarm for all of us, a signal that our compass of humanity was spinning out of control. I looked at Maria and said, "Ma'am, I'm not just listening to your case, I'm reading the physical map of your struggle." I saw the marks of stress on her hands and the deep lines of worry on her brow. These were the signs of a woman who had been burned by the fire of poverty, yet was still trying to rebuild a life for her child. I knew that my next move would have to be a shocking twist, a verdict that would change the rules of this courtroom forever and challenge the very definition of justice. I took a deep breath and let my gaze rest on the prosecutor and the corporate representative. In my 40 years on this bench, I've learned that the law is often an invisible assassin when it lacks a heart. I leaned forward and looked Maria directly in the eyes. I asked her, "Maria, if I were to dismiss this case right now, what is the first thing you would do?" The courtroom held its breath. It was a curiosity loop, a psychological method designed to pull the truth from the depths of her soul and fill the gap between what we knew and what we needed to understand. She wiped her eyes with a tattered tissue and whispered, "Your Honor, I would go to the school and tell Leo that his mommy isn't a bad person. And then I would find a way to work twice as hard to pay back every cent for that bread." Her response wasn't a hollow promise. It was a high-value commitment from a woman who still held on to her pride despite having nothing left. I saw the light of a mother's love fighting against the dead zone of her current reality. I then turned to the prosecutor. I asked him a question that I knew would challenge his overconfidence. I said, "Counsel, you are asking for a $500 fine. If this mother cannot afford a $2 loaf of bread, where exactly do you think that money will come from? And more importantly, who will pay the price when this child is left without a mother?" The prosecutor stammered, trying to retreat behind procedures and rules. But in this courtroom, I don't just follow a script. I look for the human being behind the case number. I looked at the corporate representative and asked, "Does your store truly believe that a criminal record is the cure for hunger?" I reminded them that a life sentence of unemployment is a heavy price for a moment of desperation. I told them that we were standing at a dead end of bureaucracy, and it was time for a revolution of compassion. The representative looked away, unable to meet the blow of the truth I was laying before him. I felt a surge of energy, the kind that comes when you are about to perform a shocking twist. A twist. I wasn't just going to judge a case, I was going to challenge the conscience of everyone in this room. I told Maria to stay at the podium. I had one more question for the room, one that would determine if we were a community or just a collection of ordinary people following an unjust sentence blindly. I stood up from my bench, a move I only make when I want to break the wall between the law and the people. This was no longer just about Maria, it was about the collective heart of everyone watching. I looked at the gallery filled with strangers and I did something that shocked the courtroom. I said, I am going to fine this mother $10 for taking that bread, but I'm not going to ask her to pay it. Instead, I am going to fine every single person in this courtroom 50 cents for living in a city where a mother has to steal to feed her child. The room went silent, a curiosity loop hanging in the air as they processed what I had just said. I reached into my own pocket, pulled out a bill, and placed it on the bench. I'm putting in the first $10, I said. This was the shocking twist, the sudden reversal that turned a moment of punishment into a revolution of compassion. I wanted to see if they would choose their own pride or a connection to a neighbor in need. What happened next was a miracle of human nature. One by one, people began to stand up. An officer at the door reached into his pocket. The mechanic, Mr. Henderson, walked forward with a $5 bill. Even the corporate representative, who had been so cold moments ago, stood up and placed a $20 bill in the hat being passed around by my clerk, Christina. It was an emotional payoff, a high-value moment of humanity that no one in that room will ever forget. I looked at Maria and the deadlock in her eyes had vanished, replaced by a ray of hope. She wasn't just receiving money, she was receiving recognition, a confirmation that she was seen as a person and not just a case number. We weren't just following cold procedures. We were architecting a new life for her. This was the true medicine for a broken spirit. By the time the hat reached the front, we had collected over $400. I turned to the prosecutor, whose overconfidence had completely turned into a look of deep reflection. I asked him, "Counsel, does the city still wish to pursue the jail time?" He shook his head slowly, unable to speak. The invisible assassin of bureaucracy had been defeated by a spirit of collective kindness. As the session drew to a close, the energy in the room had shifted from cold judgment to a profound sense of shared responsibility. I looked at the pile of donations, the high-value commitment from a room full of strangers, and I knew that this moment had to be more than just a temporary fix. It had to be a bridge to a sustainable future for Maria and Leo. I turned to Maria and told her, "This money is not a handout. It is an investment in your dignity. It is the community saying that we refuse to let you fall through the cracks of a broken system." But I didn't stop there. I knew that once she walked out of those oak doors, the invisible assassins of poverty would still be waiting for her. So I looked toward the gallery again and asked if anyone knew of a job opening. I reminded them that Maria wasn't just a woman who needed help. She was a woman with a map of resilience etched into her very being. Someone who had worked 2 jobs and still found time to help others. I told them that hiring someone like Maria wasn't just an act of charity. It was a smart decision for any business that valued loyalty and hard work. Then something even more unexpected happened. Mr. Henderson, the mechanic who had spoken earlier, stood up again. He cleared his throat and said that his wife ran a small catering business and was looking for a reliable assistant. He looked at Maria and said, "If you're willing to work as hard as I've seen you work on our street, the job is yours." This was the miracle we were all hoping for, a shocking twist that provided not just a loaf of bread, but a path toward long-term survival. I watched as Maria's face transformed. The deep lines of worry seemed to soften, and for the first time she stood tall, her shoulders back, reclaiming her pride. She wasn't a defendant anymore. She was a mother with a future. I told the clerk to ensure that the supermarket's charges were officially expunged from her record. I wanted to make sure that this life sentence of a criminal record would never haunt her again. We were effectively erasing the black hole that had threatened to swallow her whole. As I prepared to call the next case, I realized that we had participated in a revolution of compassion. We had proven that the law doesn't have to be a cold, unfeeling machine. It can be a medicine that heals the community. I looked at the prosecutor, who was quietly packing his bags, and I could tell that his perspective on justice had been permanently altered. This case was a silent alarm that had finally been heard, reminding us all that behind every case number is a human soul yearning to be seen. That night, after I left the courthouse, I couldn't stop thinking about the silent alarm Maria had unknowingly triggered in my heart. Her struggle wasn't just a personal failure. It was a symptom of a bureaucracy gone wrong, a system that had become an invisible assassin by prioritizing cold procedures over human suffering. I sat at my desk and realized that simply dismissing one case was like putting a small life raft in a vast, stormy ocean, when what we truly needed was a revolution in how we handle the desperate. The next morning I did what I've done for 40 years. When I see a life sentence of poverty being unfairly written by the hands of the law, I sat down and wrote a detailed letter to the city council and the mayor's office. I explained that we were wasting thousands of dollars in legal fees and court time to pursue a broken mother for a $2 loaf of bread. I told them that our current approach was a financial black hole for the city, creating more problems than it solved by breaking apart families and clogging the justice system with the raw pain of the poor. I proposed a new savior protocol, a community-based diversion program for nonviolent crimes of desperation. Instead of a verdict that would lead to a dead end of unemployment, we needed to connect these individuals with social services and local charities immediately. This wasn't just about being soft on crime, it was about architecting a society that values independence and freedom from the cycle of poverty. I wanted to ensure that the next mother who felt she was in a dead zone of despair would find a hand reaching out rather than a handcuff. The media picked up the story and the social proof effect took hold. The community was outraged that such a case had even made it to my bench. They began to see that justice with mercy wasn't a hollow promise, but a door to the truth that we all had to walk through together. I received hundreds of emails from people who said Maria's story had decoded their own hidden fears of falling behind in a world that feels increasingly backward and cold. We were finally starting to close the information gap between the law and the reality of the streets. I told the council that if we didn't act right now, we would regret losing the soul of our city. This was our twist moment, a chance to revive public trust in our institutions by proving that we haven't forgotten the human being behind every case file. A few months passed, and the echoes of that day in the courtroom continued to ripple through our city. I was sitting in my chambers one morning sipping my usual black coffee when Christina walked in with a small hand-drawn card. It was from Leo, Maria's son. Inside, he had drawn a picture of a giant loaf of bread and a smiling judge. Attached was a short note from Maria telling me she had officially started her job with Mr. Henderson's wife. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was thriving. This was the emotional payoff, the ultimate proof that when you treat a person with dignity, you don't just solve a case, you rebuild a life. I stood by my window looking out at the city of Providence and thought about how easily the invisible assassin of bureaucracy could have destroyed that little boy's world. If we had followed the strict, cold procedures of the supermarket's demand, Maria would be in a dead zone of incarceration, and Leo would be lost in the foster system. Instead, because a room full of strangers chose connection over judgment, a family was saved. This is the revolution of compassion I've tried to lead for 40 years, reminding us all that the law is a tool for healing, not just a weapon for punishment. The Jensen Protocol for food security was eventually adopted by the city, ensuring that cases of extreme desperation are now met with social services first, not handcuffs. This was the shocking twist for the system itself, a realization that justice with mercy is actually more efficient and far more powerful than blind retribution. We closed the information gap by proving that the truth is often found in the heart, not just in a police report. I hope this story serves as a silent alarm for you wherever you are watching from. I want to leave you with one final thought. The next time you see someone struggling, remember Maria. Don't just see a case number or a problem. See a human soul yearning for a second chance. We are all part of this social proof, and our actions define the soul of our community. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs a ray of hope today. Hit that subscribe button and join our mission to keep humanity at the center of justice. I am Judge Frank Caprio, and after 40 years on this bench, I know one thing for certain. Respect costs nothing, but its value is infinite. Thank you for being part of this journey with me. God bless you.